Welcome to Home's Room. Just like Homeroom, we start off our day getting together with our homies, swapping stories, even a little kiss and tell action. This podcast contains language not suitable for younger listeners, topics about sex and mental health. Discretion is advised. Our views are our own. Let class begin. Home's Room is brought to you by Anchor. Anchor by Spotify is a total package podcast tool from getting started to distribution, in-app editing, and much more. They even help you monetize your podcast. All of that for free. With a web and mobile-based app, recording anywhere on anything is a breeze. Get your voice heard with Anchor by Spotify. All right. New to the class today is a true example of open, honest, and overcoming everything thrown her way. The neurodivergent teacher, Kristen Eccleston. How's it going?
I am doing well. How are you? I'm excited to be in homeroom.
Good. There you go. See, that's the thing is like, first teacher in Home's Room. I love it. I think it's awesome. We connected on a website specifically for podcasts and podcasters. So, I know a little bit about you. I've done a little bit of research. So can you tell the rest of the class a little bit about what you do?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, sure. It's kind of more like, what don't I do? As you mentioned, we met on a podcasting kind of connection site, and that really has to do with, because I love podcasting, doing them for myself, being on them, and a lot of that has to do with having a background in broadcast engineering. But the crazy thing is that's not where my career ended up taking me. What I do now is I'm an education consultant. I was a special education teacher for years. I loved being a special education teacher. Ultimately, I had an opportunity to work with students with mental health needs, high school students, and I created a program for those students specifically. And it really got me thinking about mental health, especially in youth and in the education setting. So I went back to school, got my doctorate in mind, brain, and teaching, and focused my research on mental health in the education setting. And now I specifically help families, schools, corporations with understanding mental health and neurodiversity.
Yeah. And that is what makes you a perfect guest for us here. Believing in supporting others, teaching something, and treating every day like it's a class, always coming out, learning something. So one thing that I really like about you and what I've come to discover is you're really open about your ADHD and discussing it on your podcasts, multiple from what I understand. What led you to that? And then tell us a little bit about your podcasts.
Yeah, sure. So, I didn't find out until I was 30 that I had ADHD. And I went in to visit a doctor, I think for something completely different. And she asked me while I was there, she goes, well, do you think you have ADHD? And having been a special ed teacher for many years at that point in time, I was like, well, yeah, I think I probably do. I've always suspected that I had a little bit. And she ran the assessments that they run when you're being assessed for things like ADHD. And they came back and she goes, you're not a little bit of ADHD. You're like a lot of bit of ADHD. and it was like my life all of a sudden made a lot more sense to me. All the struggles I had in school. I was not somebody who liked school. I didn't enjoy school. In fact, that was part of the reason why I was a special ed teacher is I knew what it was like to not like school and felt like school wasn't your thing. And I wanted to have students have a better experience than I did in school. And so I felt it was really important to be open with the ADHD because I think so many times there are adults who do have ADHD or anxiety or depression and they didn't talk about it. And especially young people think that they're going through it alone, like because it wasn't being talked about, because they didn't hear adults or people older than them being like, yeah, I struggled with it too, but here's how I overcame it, or here's what I did to make it so it didn't stop me from what I wanted to achieve. And I felt like a lot of that messaging wasn't out there. So I found it to be really powerful, especially with my students and just in general when I talked about it so that they could see that other people have this going on, that other people are dealing with it, that other people don't use it as something that sets them back, that you can still be successful even if school wasn't your thing, because school wasn't. I was not a good student at all, but I still went on to be successful and do things. So it's not this thing that has to hold you back or make you different. And so I wanted to be open and honest, and I wanted to talk about it. And so I kind of started that when I was still a classroom teacher, of just being open with my students about who I was. But then on the podcast front, I felt like it was really important to bring in other people, not just myself, who are also dealing with ADHD or other neurodiverse diagnosis, and come on and say, like, here's my story, and here's what I do, and here's how this being part of my story hasn't stopped me from being successful or what I want to achieve. Yeah, maybe I had some challenges along the way, but I've still been successful. I still have been able to push through, and I wanted other people to be able to hear those stories. And then I also have a podcast where it's a mom friend of mine, and we both have ADHD, and it's like listening to one of our phone conversations, and we just ping pong back and forth for the 45-minute show of just like all the things in our life. It's like a true ADHD conversation. It's all over the place. But I think it's just good because I think it normalizes. And that's really the goal behind everything, is trying to make things be normalized so that people recognize that they're not alone.
Yeah, I think that that's good. The conversation between you and your mom friend, that one sounds like one that like a lot of people should listen to, not only because they should support you, but also because it might make them feel like they're a little bit less alone. And I think that right now in the world, especially post-COVID, there's a lot of people, especially moms, that are overwhelmed and have probably had ADHD and just never got diagnosed or thought that that's what it could be. And mental health is something that's really important to me, but also, learning about yourself and realizing that you aren't alone and other people might be having those things. So on that front, what's the most important thing you've learned about yourself, and how do you apply it to who you've become?
That's a really good question. And, I think it's actually kind of a semi deep answer. I recognized that I didn't know myself. That was one of the biggest things, as when I started to really unpack what it meant to have undiagnosed ADHD until I was 30, and trying to really recognize like who I am and what I like. So much of ADHD has to do with masking. A lot of people who are ADHD, especially those who are undiagnosed, recognize like something's up. Like I knew when I was younger, like, okay, something's up. I definitely am seeing the world a little bit different than my peers. I don't want anybody to know that, because I took it as something was wrong with me. And so, I didn't want to overly express it. And so I think a lot of what I did, and I think a lot of people with ADHD do, is you mask it, right? You start to pick up on social cues and how I should come across, or how I should almost people please in order to make it so that people don't recognize that something is going on with me. And I think I did that for so long, not only just with friends, but with family, like this really strong urge to want to appeal to everyone and make everyone happy, so that I didn't get any kind of like negative messaging towards myself. And then all that ends up happening is you end up in your 30s and you're like, I don't even know who I am. Like, do I really like these
Yeah.
things because this is what I like? Or do I like it because this is what was expected of me? Did I get married and have kids when I was young because that's what I felt like I was supposed to do? Or is that what I really wanted to do? And it almost creates this like quarter life crisis, in a sense of like, do I know myself? Like, what are these choices that I made? Are these my choices? Or are these just the choices I thought I was supposed to make? And it ends up making you kind of have to evaluate a little bit, who am I? What are my goals? What do I really like now that I can strip away all of the masking that I did for so many years? And that can be really challenging when you're trying to do that, because it's like this blurred line of who you are versus who you thought you needed to be.
Yeah. For the listeners, you can't see her, but the way she lit up talking about how much she's learned about herself and where that's taken her, to me, that's exactly what I want to feel, is that energy, because self-discovery and becoming okay with yourself is probably the most important thing. And doing it later in life is hard. But if you don't take those opportunities to be like, you know what, I got to be okay with me, and I got to decide, do I want these things for myself, or did society just tell me that this is what it is? And on top of that, discovering, having something like ADHD or whatever is, I think that that's in itself just a big moment of like weight off your shoulders. Like, okay, it wasn't just me not trying hard. It wasn't just me not, being able to handle this task and this task and that task in order. It was more about, my brain just wasn't doing the same thing that somebody else's brain might be doing. And that doesn't make me any less than, and it doesn't change anything. I just now know that that's what it is. So
Yes.
good on you. Good on you.
Thank you. And it's hard. You're right. You said it's not easy. It's not easy, especially when you're older, because I think so many people have this expectation to you too of who you are at that point in time, who you're supposed to be, the things that you do, your idiosyncrasies. And when you start to kind of strip those things away, sometimes people have a hard time with you becoming like a newer version of yourself because it's
Oh, yeah,
not who
absolutely.
they know you to be. And that can, I think, be challenging for them. And then you too, because sometimes it makes you have to evaluate, are these people truly supportive of me no matter what? Or did these people only like me for a version of myself that isn't actually me?
Yeah. Um, I will say that growth and the growth mindset around, every day, like I said, we here like to say every day is a class. So a growth mindset, it could be, you realize that wearing these shoes is uncomfortable and you don't like wearing these shoes and you decide I'm not going to wear these shoes anymore. Or it could be as much as, I'm faced with hard things every day and I can't keep my focus and something might not be wrong. I need to go get this checked out and everything in between. And I think that the work that you do and the work that you've done on yourself, showcases how you can turn those things into whatever you want to. They could be a positive or they could be a negative. It's just all about your outlook. And that's why you lighten up talking about it was so amazing to me.
Well,
So
thank you.
thanks for that.
I appreciate that. I do. And to be fair, it has not always been this place of like lighting up and feeling great about it. There was definitely moments where in this discovery where it was hard, where I was not in a great mental space, where it was challenging, but I think it's, that perseverance and coming out the other side and now really having a better sense of myself. That's why I'm able to light up now and be excited about it. But I don't want people to think that it's just like, a light bulb goes off one day and you're like, oh, it's the new me. Like it definitely takes time, and definitely be kind to yourself, because there are days where it is hard and you will face struggles. But if you definitely keep pushing, you'll come out the other side really having a stronger sense of yourself and then just feeling better about the world in general because of it.
Yeah. So, you know, with that being said, one of the things that I'm more vocal about now than I used to be. I am a writer. I've written, 3 1/4 books and like 3/4 of a script.
That's
But
amazing.
I grew up with dyslexia, and I grew up in, I was born in '88, so I was going to school in like the early '90s through early 2000s. And one thing that always bugged me was when they first kind of discovered I had dyslexia. Back then it used to be a blanket, oh, throw them into the class here or throw them into a lesser class. And instead of challenging me, they gave me a ton of crutches to use. And I think that I'm glad that the world has shifted from that. But I know for me, the only thing that I could say that they did in those moments that was good is teaching me how to read with a piece of paper and a line. So I was just reading one line at a time to make it easier to digest and keep my brain focused on the words that were just in front of me instead of 6 paragraphs on a page. And I believe that now hopefully we're shifting from that, and people like you doing the work that you do, hopefully everybody is getting help and there's fewer and fewer falling through those cracks. But I know for me back then it was so hard to feel like I could participate in class. When they would call on me to read, I was like, oh crap. And I used to try and time my bathroom break to when it was going to get to me so I could just not be in the room. And then they'd be like, oh, well, we'll just come back to you. And it's like, okay, that's fine. So then I would time, whatever else, try and make sure that I wasn't able to read in that moment. So I didn't have to, or I had to do as little as possible. And that's a terrible way to be. But
Yeah.
also I grew up always loving to write. As long as I can remember, I would tell stories, I would write stories. And my mom was a very big, helpful and supportive person to me when it came to my writing. She would help me type stuff out. She would help me like proofread, whatever it was. And I thank her for that support, because if it wasn't for her being there and, kind of being how you are now, where you're just supportive and giving me the patience and trying to help me rather than just being like, you're a dumb kid, go over here and sit in the corner kind of thing, which, was like the mentality in the 90s. It seemed like was, let's just push
Yeah.
you in this class and, that's it. So I think that it's good that there are people like you out there, and there are people like you bringing awareness and podcasts and, actually in the classrooms and actually in office buildings and wherever it is, that are creating a better culture in the world to understand this as, I'm not less than, I just need a little bit more help, or I just need a little bit more patience. And I think that that's amazing. So
Well, first off, thank you. You're giving me like way too much credit, and it's really kind of you. And then secondly, I'm sad to hear that you had to go through that. And I understand it. I think too, as you and I are close in age, I was 85. So it was kind of like that same time period of, when we were in school. And it was the same thing for little girls with ADHD. It was only hyperactive little boys who had ADHD. So
yeah,
we got overlooked or in the corner. But it breaks my heart to hear that that was the school experience that you had, because with dyslexia, what we now know is anybody who's neurodiverse is just seeing the world differently. And especially dyslexia has some really cool traits to it. I mean, you see the world in 3D in your mind. Like, you have very clear pictures in your mind. You can see it in 3D. I mean, to me,
absolutely.
that's a higher level brain ability thing that can happen. Not everybody can do that. That's not like this common built in thing. Your brain, in my opinion, is advanced. It has this really cool thing that it can do, but yeah, like the letter stuff happens. Yeah, that those things are there, but how much is it that maybe you're just not being presented with the right way to learn or the right way to take in information? And if you had been presented with maybe like a more hands-on or a project-based or an arts-based type of
Yeah.
curriculum, would that have impacted you differently than what we know to be like that standard? We sit, we're talked at, you read out of the book out loud, right? And you're expected to just know this information. And I feel bad for anybody who is neurodiverse who had to go through school today, and especially when we were younger, because school's this one size fits all, right? It's this one
Yeah.
size fits all mentality. And if you don't fall into this one size fits all, then you end up having to feel like something is wrong with you. That like, what is wrong with me that I'm not smart enough, or like my brain looks at the world differently.
Exactly.
And you're meant to feel that way. Like most of the things have the word disorder in it. Like ADHD has attention deficit disorder in it, so you're made to think that something is wrong with you, but there isn't. Your brain just sees the world differently. And I try to say, when it comes to like neurodiverse and neurotypical, it's the same. If you put them on a scale, they'd weigh the same. The only difference is just how you are viewing the world, how you're taking in information. There's pros and cons to both. There's deficits and there's pluses to both. But we seem to put all these eggs in this basket that if you're neurodiverse, something is wrong with you. No, you're not. You're incredibly smart. You're incredibly creative. You have all sorts of great ideas. Your brain sees things in beautiful, unique ways. But we always forget to celebrate that because we didn't fit into this one size fits all in school. And a lot of times that carries with us. And I think there's a lot of adults who still are struggling with ideas of, am I smart? What am I capable of? What can I do? And I really hate that. I mean, like I said, it took me almost a decade out of school for a light bulb to go off in my head and go, wait, I think I can do a lot more than I thought I could. But I hate that there's so many people that it takes a decade to get to that conclusion, or that it never happens at all. Like kids at 18 should be able to come out of high school and be like, I got this. No matter how
Yeah.
your brain works or how your brain functions, you should be able to leave school with the idea that like, I can take on the world. Here are my strengths and the things that I am capable of, no matter how it is that my brain functions or works.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And, again, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, is your outlook on that situation is the conversation that needs to be happening right now. And I think that, you hit it on, the nail on the head with, my brain works differently, but it doesn't work wrong. And I think that when I was younger, it made me feel like my brain worked wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first time, I think I was in 7th grade, my teacher, one of the few teachers that I had that like took an actual effort to me, she gave me a test, and I failed the test, but she knew I could answer the questions when she asked them in the class. She's like, what happened here? Why was, why is the score so low here? I know you know this answer. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't know. It just is. And she gave me a separate test. I believe it was the test from like the year before, because she was one of those teachers that was like, you ain't cheating in my class. I'm going to change the tests up. So she verbally gave me the test, and I got all of the questions correct, including one that she just threw in there randomly. And she then started saying, I'm going to give you all of the tests verbally. If you don't mind coming into this class a little bit earlier, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
or if you want to stay a little bit later, we'll do a verbal test, and that's how you'll be graded. And I just remember thinking in that moment, like, thank you, because I can answer these questions. But, now I feel like everybody's like, well, he's in trouble. Why is he staying? Or, oh, why is he here first? So it was a double-edged sword. But at the same
Yeah.
time, I realized in that moment, she's trying to do something to make it better, and not just give me a crutch saying, here's a word processor, take this computer and write, instead of,
Doing it.
trying to help me figure out how to better understand it. And like you said, seeing the world in 3D. I'm a builder. I'm a creative in general, so all those kind of things are extremely amazing to me, because I can picture the world. And I would say 3D is a perfect example of what word to use or what term to describe it. And I know that that's how it is, but I wouldn't have put it into those terms. So thank you for that, because
Yeah.
that in itself is just like, absolutely, yeah, that's what I feel, that's what I see. So thank you.
Well, good. I'm glad I could share that with you. And I'm glad to hear that the teacher did that. But I think we still face that same issue. A lot of students today, right, who have dyslexia, ADHD, like they need the kind of accommodation that the teacher did for you. But you're right. There's this double-edged sword, right? Like the biggest thing that I hear from youth all the time is they don't want to feel different. There's nothing that they want more than to feel, they do not want to feel different from their peers. Anything that makes you stand out. And I get it. I remember being 16 and I worked with 16-year-olds for a really long time. So, like, I get it. You don't want to feel like you are different, that something is wrong with you. And those things that make you get called out sometimes, even though they end up being for your benefit, right? You feel like, okay, are people looking at me? Do they know I'm going in extra? Why am I going in extra? Do I have to answer these questions? And a lot of anxiety comes from that. But the thing that I think we miss the mark on in education is a lot of those things, like what that teacher was doing for you, are just best practices. There are tons and tons and tons of research that shows what best practices are in the classroom. And what I mean by best practices is just like kids, no matter what, if you're neurodiverse, you're neurotypical, like you would benefit from this type of delivery or this type of information given to you in the classroom. And that type of thing that that teacher did for you is a best practice. Now, if we just gave that opportunity to everyone who felt like, hey, I think I would benefit from that, then it would take some of that stigma away from students, right? Instead of it having to seem like I'm being singled out or, I'm different. If it was just that's an option for everybody and it doesn't matter, like people would stop thinking about, like kids wouldn't think about, oh, that's strange, or why is that kid going in, or why am I going in? Because it would just be an option that was there for every student. And it would allow students to really be able to utilize and pick out what was best for them in their learning.
Yeah. That's a perfect way to segue into the next thing I want to talk about. So I was an early education teacher for a short time. I did 3s and 4s and sometimes infants, but like I tried to stay away from the infants as much as possible, because nobody wants like
I
7
get it. I
crying
have 2
kids.
kids. I get
Yeah.
it.
So that was an interesting experience. And, one of the most important things that I drew from that was, being patient with myself as well as the students. And, I wonder what your favorite thing about working with people to build them up and to help them learn is. Cause I know for me, being patient with them and trying to figure out a way to communicate with them specifically was like always what I wanted.
Mm,
And I remember when the state came in once, and I got evaluated, and the lady pulled me aside and I had to answer questions. And I was kind of like, I'm new here. Why are you asking me? She's like,
mm,
I just wanted to take you aside, because you seem like you're really tied in, and your patience level is something that I've never seen in the world. And I know what it's like to feel different. I know what it's like to not have people give you patience when you need it. So
yeah.
it's 100% important to me to give people that patience. So I wonder what your favorite thing about helping people and helping people learn is.
That's a really good question. Of all the questions I've ever been asked, I don't know what, and I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. And I think I'm going to piggyback off what you said a little bit. I think the patience is a big thing because, again, I think I had a similar experience to you as I know what it felt like to be as a student who didn't like school, who felt like they were struggling, who felt like something was wrong with them. And so I always wanted to be able to provide students with an opportunity to not have to feel that way, that somebody understood, especially as a teacher, understood how they felt and where they were coming from. And that was always really important to me. But I have to admit, I am very, very fortunate in my career that I have several students who I've worked with since the early 2000s is when I've been in education. And I've had several students who I feel like they have made just as much of an impact on me as hopefully I made on them. I even have one student who I was so stupid. I was 22 years old. I was like fresh student teaching. And I used to have one student who I would tell all the time that it's just rainbows and ponies. Don't worry, no stress. It's rainbows and ponies. They're now in their 30s and they have a tattoo of a pony with a rainbow mane. And I was like, on one hand, I'm like so touched, but on the other hand, I'm like, oh my God, I was like this stupid 22-year-old who was saying this stuff to this student. But it obviously, I guess, meant enough to them. But I had another student, and I'll tell this story because I love telling this story. I especially love telling this story with teachers. I had a student who, my first year at a high school that I was teaching at was also their first year as a freshman. And this student quickly kind of got this reputation. And I won't say his name because I don't want it ever to be associated with him, but he essentially was called his name, the virus. It rhymed with the virus. And he got known to be like that with different teachers. And I will have to say, like, there were usually times where something, got broken or stolen or something happened. There was probably a good chance he was associated with it. But anytime I had ever had an interaction with this kid, I had just adored him. He just had charmed the pants off of me every time. Like, he couldn't have been friendlier with me. I always was happy to help him. And I remember it making other staff angry that I would help him because they were not as thrilled with him. And by his junior year, he ended up being on my caseload. So as a special education teacher, I used to have a caseload of students with IEPs. And I just remember people being really kind of crude to me, like, I don't know why you have him. You're not going to like him. You're not going to like his family. You're not going to like all this, like all these negative things about him. And I can remember on the first day of school, I called his mother just to introduce myself, to say, hi, I'm so-and-so's case manager. Just want to reach out. And I remember when she answered the phone after I had said, hi, I'm Kristen Eccleston. I'm calling from, she goes, what did he do? And I was like, oh my God.
Oh, wow.
This poor mother has never received a positive phone call about this kid. It has only ever been negative. So she's just immediately like, what did he do? And I just remember feeling so hurt for his mom. So I made it my mission that year that, like, anything he did, and I happened to also teach him twice a day. So I ended up being able to build like a really nice rapport with him. I would call his mom to just be like, hey, he did this today, so that she started getting positive phone calls about him. I noticed that like the positive phone calls ended up shifting his attitude towards school. Next thing I know, he's like a full-blown honor student, straight A student. And I don't think that it really had anything to do with me. All it had to do was the fact that one person finally, after 3 years of high school, went, I believe in you, and I think you're really capable.
Absolutely.
That's it. And I think that was just the shift that he needed. And then I would notice things like he's getting these PSAT scores back that are like out of this world, like high scores and stuff. And I'm like, do you recognize how smart you are? I don't think anybody had ever told him like how smart he was or how capable he was. And now he works for cybersecurity for like one of the biggest companies in the world. And I love that because I feel like people don't realize the power you have as a teacher sometimes, and the ability that just one person can do to either make or break the kid. I don't think that there was any secret to him that staff talked about him the way that they did. I can remember going and advocating for him and the teacher being like, why would I do that for this kid? Like, it's this kid. Like, why would I do that? And I remember thinking, like, it's so bad that it's educators, people who like get into this profession because we love kids, hopefully, right? And we want to see them succeed, that we would turn our backs essentially on this child. And it showed me the second that somebody was willing to go, I'm not going to turn my back on you, it made a night and day difference for this kid. One person. And that, to me, was what I loved the most about being a teacher. And please know, I'm not painting myself to be a saint. There have been plenty of kids in my career where I was like, I hope you find your person, because it is not me, because I don't know how much more we can converse, because we are not on the same page. But when I did have the opportunity to have the kid who was my kid, who I did make that connection with, that meant everything in the world to me. And I would have been willing to die on any hill for that kid, because as long as they were giving it everything they had, I would give it everything I had 100%. And I didn't care who I had to go up against in order to make sure that they felt the success and the support that they deserved to have. And that's what I loved most about when I was a teacher. And I think that's probably what I miss the most too about now being on the
Absolutely.
consulting side and not being in the classroom, is I miss being able to be that person for kids.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. You reminded me of two stories that I think you will get a kick out of. Back to the rainbow and unicorn, like how perfect that one is. I remember I had like pictures on my phone of like cars and stuff. I'm a car guy. And it's, I guess likened to seeing the world in 3D. I went to school to build race car chassis and things like that. So like I enjoy welding, I enjoy fabricating, building stuff. So I had a ton of those pictures on my phone. And one of the little boys came up and he was sitting in my lap looking at pictures. And we used to have a window that overlooked the dumpsters. So every day there was a trash truck that come up. So any vehicle that he saw, it was trash truck. And I was like, no, that's a this. And there was one picture of what's called a trophy truck. It's a truck you'd see driving through the desert, big wheels, all that kind of stuff. And he pointed out and said trash truck. And I was like, no, trophy truck. And he said, trash truck? And I said, again, no, trophy truck. So we sat there going back and forth, and I just thought it was funny. And I think he was kind of testing my will a little bit to see if I was just going to agree with them. So then, the next day I think I had my phone in my hand, but it wasn't on. It was just like in my hand. And he pointed at my phone and he said, trophy truck. And I was like, oh, look, did I just impart wisdom on a child? Is that what just happened? And it was one of those moments of like, I wonder later on in life if he's going to just have like, and like I said, I did early education, so I don't know where he is and what he's into now, but I wonder if he just has like an affinity to off-road vehicles just simply because of that. But then you also made me think of another story, similarly to, somebody labeled the problem. And this kid he came from a bad home situation. He was in and out because he was in a little bit of foster care, a little bit of grandparents' care. And, he was very much one of those kids that had like all of the health problems that you could have growing up in that environment. And he would complain because he had a couple false teeth already, and he would complain about his mouth hurting. So on those days, I came to realize that something else was probably bothering him. That was the easiest thing he could say, and people would leave him alone, or people would give him, whatever he wanted, because that's all you can do. And, he would act out and do all sorts of crazy things. And he was, one of the kids that would sometimes swing at teachers, and it's one of those just like all around bad situations. So when I started, he came to me and I told him to sit down, or I told him to lay down for a nap or something. I don't remember what it was. And he looked at me and he said no. And I was like, well, you kind of have to, because that's what we're doing right now. And he's like, I don't want to take a nap. And I was like, do you not want to take a nap because you're not tired, or do you not want to take a nap because you just don't want to take a nap? He's like, I'm not tired. And I was like, so then can you lay down on your, like, just sit down on your mat, and as long as you stay over here, don't interact with anybody else, you're fine. And he looked at me kind of dumbfounded, like everybody had always made him lay down. And I just couldn't understand what this look was from, such a young kid. Like, wait, you just asked me a follow-up question and gave me an option? And he ended up having, several episodes after that. And whenever I came to talk to him, he would always like calm down when I would talk to him. And people were like, I don't know how you communicate with him or what it is. And I was like, well, number one, I'm talking to him like he's a person, because he's a person, and giving him the opportunity to express what he needed. And, I would get called out of my classroom once I switched out of that one to like come handle him. And I was like, don't say handle him, because that's not what it is. Like I'm just talking to him. That's the problem, is you're saying I have to handle him like he's a problem. It's not a problem. He's just a kid in a tough situation that, just needs some grace and compassion. Show it to him, and I'm sure he'll be fine. And I remember he got moved out of that school because of his care situation. And that's one that sticks with me, where I hope he's doing well, simply because I know that he's a good kid. He's
Yeah.
way smarter and smart enough to like manipulate situations. So that shows a level of, especially at that age, a level of intelligence that like not a lot of kids show. So that's pretty, but like I said, it just makes me think of that. And I'm glad to hear stories like that from teachers where they show that level of care about somebody else's kid. You know, not, I don't ever want to get the phone call from a school saying my kid is doing this or my kid's doing that. But I also think that it's sad that parents only get those phone calls sometimes, you know.
It is, especially for kids who have disabilities or they have struggles or there's other things going on. You're right. Like sometimes parents only get those negative calls, like that one parent I worked with, and it's heartbreaking when it happens because there's something to celebrate in every child. And I'm glad to hear that you got to be that person, like the person who was that child's trusted adult. And it makes me sad that more people don't stop and think for a second, like what could be going on. It sounds like you very much recognize that this kid had other things in their life that was going on that may have been impacting them more heavily than just being available for learning on a day-to-day basis. And I
Yeah.
think teachers forget that. They think that the kid with their head down who's sleeping just doesn't care or is just lazy. And they sometimes forget to stop and think like maybe this is a kid who has like 5 brothers and sisters and they're the oldest and it's their job to be the one who makes sure that they get their homework done and get off the bus and get fed and get bathed and get into dinner. And so they're the ones who are essentially like the adult or the parent. And so school is not their primary focus. Or maybe they have a secondary job that they have to do to help support
Yeah.
income with the family. Or maybe they're homeless. Like I tell teachers all the time, like there's a root cause to every behavior. If you have a child who is either not engaged in your class or is acting out or something, there is a root cause to it. There is something going on and they just don't have the ability to communicate with you what that is. You're seeing it in some kind of behavioral need. And if you can take a minute to kind of remove yourself from like taking it personally and really try to get down to, okay, what is going on in this kid's life and how can I be a trusted and caring and compassionate adult? You'll usually find that you can make a connection with that kid and that they're grateful for you. And some kids, and I also share this with adults, some kids have had so much trauma. I mean, so much trauma in their lives. And I had a child who I worked with years ago who I love him and he and I had a great relationship, but it took us almost 2 years to get there because he had had so much trauma in his life and so many adults had failed him and done him wrong that who was I? I was just one more adult. And until he knew that I wasn't going to fail him and be like, forget this, he tested me because he tested me by trying to get me mad and trying to push me away because he
Mm-hmm.
wanted to see if I would just go forget this.
Yep.
So, but it took me 2 years of being persistent and being like, I'm still going to be here, friend. And then once he finally trusted that I would be there, I had a beautiful relationship with him, a beautiful. But sometimes you have to stop and realize the level of trauma that some kids have faced. You're not going to just give them a candy bar one day and be their BFF. Like you're
Yeah.
going to have to earn their trust and that relationship because they've had too many adults before you that have burned them.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I couldn't agree more with that. Where it's, I think a lot of kids deal with, especially later on in school, you know, in tail end of junior high, middle school, beginning of high school, where by that point teachers have already kind of made that student who they're going to be until they get that teacher that just like treats them well. I remember I worked a night job at a theater and I had a 0 hour where I had to be up really early. And then by the time I got to my history class, I was like exhausted and I had, you know, one more class after that before I had to leave to go to work the next day or whatever it was. And I would lay down and like, just like you said, lay my head on the desk. And I remember one of the students was like, why does he get to sleep, but I don't get to sleep? And she called out, hey Holmes, what's the answer to, and then like routed off some question, and it was a civics class. And I didn't, not even leaning my head up, answered the question, and she just turned and looked at that student and was like, that's why he gets to put his head down. And I was just like, that was the best moment. And she became my favorite teacher I think I've ever had, just simply because she understood that I wasn't just like disengaged for whatever reason. She trusted that I could do the work. She trusted that I was going to read and do the homework, whatever it was. I just had a lot going on. And so
Yeah.
absolutely.
Man, I love to hear that. I'm glad.
one of the things that I love about your podcast is when you make a mistake, you roll with it, and I try and do that here too. I don't try and edit. If I do edit, it's mostly because like there was a pause, or there was, you know, it was a moment where there was actually something technically wrong, not just a flub of a word, or I just couldn't form a sentence the way I needed to. I wonder, how do you encourage people to deal with mistakes in the neurodivergent learning process?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think it has to do with how I exactly what you said, like roll with it. Like we're all going to make mistakes. Every single one of us is going to make mistakes. And I think the thing that we have been taught, which is really just not done us well, is that failure is a big deal. That failure is this bad, negative thing, that making mistakes is bad. It's negative. It's not. Failure, if not done maliciously or with ill intent, failure is an opportunity to learn and grow. Failure is an opportunity to
Absolutely.
go, oh, this didn't work this way, but now I've learned this lesson from it. So the next time I'm going to apply it and I'm going to try and do better or make things better. I never have a problem with failure, not with my kids, not with my students, no one, as long as it wasn't done intentionally or with ill intent of any kind. Like, but failure is a part of life. And I think we've gotten too many messages that something is wrong with you, or you're a failure, or you shouldn't fail, you should always be perfect, and you're not. And life is not perfect. We always have ups and downs in life, and failure is part of it, but I think it's taking failure as an opportunity to learn, grow, and apply it in the future is important. And I think with neurodiverse people especially, until the world is a lot more kind and understanding, and not this one size fits all, especially in education, it's okay to make mistakes. You're going to fail. Maybe you're going to be like me and you're going to have horrible SAT scores, but it's not going to stop you. Like, you can still go forward and you can still achieve the things that you want to achieve. I mean, I never in a million years, if I could go back in time and talk to my high school self and say, hey, you're going to have a doctorate from Johns Hopkins University, high school me would be like, you're on crack, future you, because I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I can't even get through my SATs right now. And so I don't want people to have this idea that some of these things are going to hold you back in life. They're not. It might be a temporary holdback, or maybe it's going to put you on a different path, but ultimately your path is going to be your path, and know that you are capable of achieving what you want to achieve. And if things are not going the way you want, or you feel like you're not being successful, that's okay. Learn from it, grow with it, roll with it, because you are incredibly capable and incredibly bright and talented.
Absolutely. I love that. That is, like I said, I when I come across the profiles and, people on that side, like I get reached out to, and, I'm sure, having a podcast, it's like people just come out of the woodworks, but,
Yeah. Yeah.
I definitely want people to be, and it sounds really weird to say my brand, because I'm so new at this, but I
No, I
want
get
people to
it.
be on brand with the message I'm trying to put out there. And if there was ever a perfect like trailer segue, into what this is about, what you just said is exactly that. I think that
Okay.
failure is not it's, I say failure is not an option, not because you can't fail, but because there is no such thing as failure. You just
Yes.
learn. You
Yes.
you go with it. And I grew up in a way that like we weren't allowed to consider ourselves as a failure or that we failed. It was always very much, so what's the next step then?
Yeah.
This didn't work out. What is the next step? Go straight to the solution. What did you learn from what you did? And working in a situation where I'm physical. I was a roller derby player.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah. You know, I often, anytime something didn't work out in my favor, it was more self-learning. Like what can I do next time? How can I manage the next situation? And in that world, situations are fluid, but it doesn't mean I didn't learn a skill. It doesn't mean that I didn't, use what just did not work
Yeah.
to learn never to do that thing again. I just got blown up trying to, make a move. I know not to go to that person's strong side the next time, because that's not going to work out.
Right.
But yeah, like I said, um, and for what you just said, I like, there's like zero, I'm beaming, because that's just so
Oh,
exactly what it is. And I love that. You said on a podcast your views on how teachers are treated, post and during the pandemic.
mm,
To me, they're very valid. parents just wanted to, the customer is always right style of service. And now it's showing how valuable education and educators are. And I just, I wish that people could give teachers the credit they deserve, but also understand that like teachers aren't babysitters. Teachers are also not parents. So the work that they try and do with your kid for the 8 hours they have them is work that they're doing with everybody's kid for 8 hours while they have them all. And to not have funding, to not have resources, to not have pay, to not have sick leave in some cases, to not have enough substitutes, to not even have enough bus drivers to get some of the kids to schools. Like there's so much going on. And to have a teacher get, accosted by a parent over something silly, or to be like, well, my kid did this and I need you to uphold the discipline that I set for them because you're allowing them to get away with this at school. And that's not how it works. No, that's not that is where my job ends. And you as a parent are responsible. So,
Oh, but you get, I mean, this is a true story. Now, this was many years ago, but a true story. I called a parent one time because I had concerns with a student, and I don't remember specifically what the concerns were, only that I had concerns. And I remember the parent's response to me was, between the hours of 8 and 3, they're your problem.
oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was like, okay. And it wasn't like, and I don't think I was even calling to be like, your kid did all, like, it was more like, hey, I just want to make you aware because we need to like team approach this because this is a concern. And I more or less was told, like, it's my problem. Don't call me again about the things that are your problem during the hours that you have my child. And I remember just being like, that's kind of crazy to me. And it was sad that during the pandemic, I felt like when the pandemic first started, I felt like a lot of parents were like, oh my God, we don't pay these teachers enough. Oh my God, I love these teachers. Like it was like all the praise in the world for teachers, because now everybody all of a sudden kind of like had a very, and I'm going to call it a mild, because it was a mild taste because you only had your child at home with you kind of thing. And so they had a mild taste of everything that was kind of involved in having to teach their child. And it was like, oh my God, I love these teachers. But then it was like the second, the kind of the glamour, and not that glamour is the right word here, but just kind of the COVID being at home lockdown, the appeal to it had started to wear off and people were over it. Then all of a sudden it was like, forget you teachers, you're whole lazy. We want our kids back in the school building. We don't care that you have health issues or because I'm going to continue working from home, but we want you back in the building. And we don't care if you have immune compromise or you're taking care of sick people or whatever, because we can't have our kids back in our house anymore. They got to get back in the building. You guys are lazy. That's the only reason why you don't want to go back. So get back in class. And I think a lot of teachers were like, whoa, what happened to we're the best thing ever. We don't get enough credit. Now all of a sudden we're super lazy because we have the same, concerns over our health and well-being that you do. Hence why you're continuing to work from home, but you just don't want to deal with your kid anymore. So I think there were a lot of teachers who just felt really, really hurt and betrayed by that, because it went from all this praise to all of a sudden, get in your place and know your place. You're a public servant. Your feelings don't matter and don't count.
Yeah, that's exactly like I said. It became like the customer's always right. Like this burger today is not ketchuped enough, and now there's too much ketchup on it. And I don't think that parents understood going in what teachers dealt with, but then they also realized really quick they don't have the bandwidth to handle that. And that's only one kid or maybe two that you live with on a regular basis, you birthed and created. So imagine what that's like for one teacher with, in some cases now more than what a teacher to student ratio should be. And I think that that's, absolutely terrible. So I have a fair amount of teacher friends, and like I said, I did early education. So any teachers listening, I definitely am one of those parents that was like, I'm keeping my kid home until it's safe enough to go back. And it wasn't offered. And I remember, thinking, I can't believe that we have teachers protesting just so that they could not die. Like a teacher should not be put in a situation where they have to say, hey, I don't want to teach because I have asthma. I have, I've recovered from cancer. I have family that I'm taking care of. That you shouldn't be put in that position to begin with, let alone be forced by, public opinion to feel almost bad about it. And it seemed like that's the way it was going. So
I'll say that was probably what made me leave. I mean, there were a lot of different things, but one of the main things was at the time that all this was happening, my mother had throat cancer and I was her primary caretaker. And I remember I applied, I think, to be able to continue teaching from home or something. And I got ADA approval, but they wouldn't let me, even though I got ADA approval, I didn't get like the kind of approval where I could stay out of the building. And I said to my principal, I was like, hey, like, I don't mind teaching. Like, I'm happy to continue virtually providing instruction, but like, I can't come in and risk getting exposure because right now I am my mother's primary caretaker and she has no immune system. I mean, she was in the throes of her radiation and chemo treatment. She had almost died and, recently and had been in the hospital. So I was like, I can't come in. And I felt bad for the principal. I did, because he was in this position where it's like, if he said yes to me, then he had to say yes to everybody. So he just kind of took the blanketed, if you got ADA approval, then you can do it. But if you didn't, then, there's nothing I can do. And I got why he did that. But so I ultimately said, fine, well, then I can't come in. I'm going to continue to be on leave. And then that left the school district without a teacher, without a certified person, with having to get a substitute and all this other stuff. And I remember just thinking how ridiculous that was, that I could, okay, I'll just continue to stay on leave rather than them working with me so that they could at least ensure that they had a certified teacher who was providing instruction to students. Like, that was the one thing that I just didn't understand about the whole pandemic and how they were making decisions with stuff. And I think a lot of teachers just, it put a really bad taste in their mouth, and they were like, well, fine, then I can make more money doing other things someplace else then, if this is how you guys really view and see me. And I think that's what happened, is a lot of teachers finally went, so this is how you really view and how you really see me and how much value you have in me. So, all right, I'm done.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And it's really heavy. It's really heavy. And I think that nobody wins in that situation. And that's the part that is the most disappointing, is that nobody wins in that situation. The students don't win, the schools don't win, the teachers don't win. And if parents want their kids to be successful, the parents definitely aren't going to win by, experienced and, caring teachers. Cause I think it speaks to the personality of a teacher to care enough about their health, to care enough about the situation they're being put in. So I would imagine the teachers that left are probably some of the better educators that needed to be occupying those jobs. And, just like the healthcare profession, the people that left that are people that had probably done a lot or seen a lot and understood how valuable they were, and their value wasn't being seen. So wrapping up here on a little bit lighter, some this or that questions. So you ready for them?
I'm ready.
All right. So first one, seeing a young person achieve a goal or seeing an adult finally understand they just learned they were different and it was never about how hard they tried.
Oh God, I want both. I can't decide on I want both for that. I guess if I had to pick one, I would pick the young person, just because I don't want them to have to get to that point as the adult. And,
good answer.
And it have to be where, it took me this long to figure it out. But I would want that for both. I truly do. It's hard to pick one, but I say the young person just so that they don't have to be that adult who finally makes that realization.
That was quick logic. I like that one. That was good. That was a good one. So teaching a group or teaching one-on-one?
I think I like teaching groups because oftentimes there's dynamics and you can play off the dynamics. So I definitely think I have to go with teaching a group.
All right. So this is the heavy hitter.
Okay.
Hosting a podcast or being a guest on a podcast?
Oh, I love being a guest. I feel like the pressure's off a little bit. Which maybe some people feel the opposite, but I'm always like, am I asking the right questions? Am I, am I timing this right? Yeah. So I don't know. I think I like being the guest and just showing up and going with the flow.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You can't see me, but my eyes are darting from like three different things, making sure levels are good, making sure time is going. Where are my questions? What are my notes? What do I need? Did I say everything? So absolutely, I feel that. But yeah, like I said, I think all of your answers to those were like spot on. And being a guest is definitely, pressure's off. And hopefully you enjoyed your guesting here. I appreciate you coming on. If people wanted to find out more about what you do and find you, where should they go?
Absolutely. The easiest way to find me is to visit my website, which is www.theneurodivers.teacher.com, or Instagram, TikTok. It's at the.neurodiverse.teacher.
Yeah, and we'll link that in the show notes below. Also, look forward on our Instagram, because Instagram is, if you use it correctly, a good marketing tool and a good networking tool. If you use it incorrectly, it is a time suck. But try and balance that out. I just want to say again, thank you for coming on. Thank you for talking with us about what you do, and hopefully some people learned some stuff. I know I did. I can't thank you enough, because this was a great conversation to have.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate you being here and you having the faith to bring me on as a guest. So thank you.
Absolutely. The bell is about to ring. If you want to drop us a voice message or simply ask a question, you can do that by clicking the link in the show notes below. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review. It helps more people find us. Theme music by Kinsey. More music available on Spotify. Remember, every day is a class. Go learn something.